former Vice President Joe Biden. He sparked controversy on Friday with comments he made to a radio talk show host about African-American voters torn between him and President Trump.
It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community. I would love to see.
Take a look at my record, man. I extended the voting rights 25 years. I have a record that is second to none.
Former Vice President Biden later walked back those comments and said he, quote, should not have been so cavalier. Ayesha, what did this moment, this episode, reveal about the Biden campaign?
It revealed that they have a lot of work to do with the former vice president and how he's able to talk about these issues. The African-American part of the electorate is the huge part of the Democrats' base. And you need to be able, as the Democratic nominee for president, to talk about these issues, to talk about race, and to talk about your record, and especially when you have a record as long as Joe Biden's, to explain maybe your evolution and the changes that you might make or things that you might do differently now. And for him to get caught up and to question people's blackness or to say that he was kind of joking, like, that is something that will need to be addressed, and this is something that he'll have to talk about. It doesn't mean that I don't think that this is going to maybe soften his support from African Americans, but it is something that he's going to have to address. How do you talk about these issues?
Stephanie, get in here. I can see you're wanting to jump in.
Okay, but you know what else he did today? He made news. And had former Vice President Biden given a thoughtful, mature explanation, which would have been the correct answer, do you think we would be talking about it right now? The answer is no. And President Trump, with his three-word slogans and the over-the-top things he says, good or bad, control the narrative. And Joe Biden has to figure out how to get into that narrative. And so while his word choices were not the best choices, he is trying to inject himself and get people to pay attention. And we're paying attention.
Dan, what's your view? What does your reporting tell you? You've been covering campaigns for decades.
A couple of things, Bob. One was this was not a smart statement, to put it mildly. It is not the right of any white person to tell black people whether they're black or not. And I think the former vice president and his team realized fairly quickly that this was a mistake, and that if they didn't deal with it right away, it could become a more serious mistake. I think it could have implications. I'm not predicting this, but it could have implications on his choice of a vice president. Beyond this, in talking to people who are involved in the Biden campaign, I mean, one of the things they see is that in this period when people are saying he needs to get out of the basement and he needs to engage more, what they've seen is that President Trump, as Jonathan mentioned, President Trump's approval rating on handling of the coronavirus has gone from slightly positive to notably negative. I mean, in one 538 summary I looked at today, it had gone from 2 points positive to 10 points negative. There's other polling that underscores that. So if you're the Biden campaign, you have to say the president is doing all of these things, and in fact, he's going backwards while we are sitting here being criticized for not doing much, but we're holding our own, and in many of the battleground states, he has a slight lead. So their view is they are not going to engage in the traditional way with President Trump. They hope that he will be able to, as one person suggested to me, model presidential behavior, which is to say when he goes out, he'll wear a mask and do things like that. But they feel at this point, they're not taking anything for granted, certainly, but they feel at this point that Trump is hurting himself.
To that question of whether the president's hurting himself, Jonathan, I don't want to forget about your reporting this week on the dismissal of the Inspector General at the State Department. Is there any concern inside the White House that they will pay a political price for these kinds of moves? And Secretary of State Pompeo, not only his situation with the IG, but having these big Madison fancy dinners in Foggy Bottom.
It's not so much those episodes that concern them. The thing that if you're talking about concerns in the White House and the political team around Trump, the thing they are most concerned about consistently is what I mentioned earlier, which is the polling among seniors. They are quite disturbed by the slippage in President Trump's numbers among seniors and how to the extent to which Biden is outperforming Hillary Clinton her performance among that age group in November 2016. They're not panicking because it's May and we're in the middle of a once-in-a-century pandemic and Great Depression unemployment numbers, so it's not the best time in the world to take a snapshot of the electorate. But they are concerned about that because if these numbers hold, I mean, you're in real trouble. You can forget about all the other little nuances about digital campaigning and, you know, did he go too far with Rick Grenell, etc. There's something much deeper than that going on, which is what they're worried about.
Are they also worried, Ayesha, about losing the Senate majority? I mean, if they're having a problem in the White House with senior voters, I've had my own reporting show concerns across the board in the GOP.
I think right now, with the president's response to the pandemic and the way that right now it's being panned in the polls, that has to be a concern, as you said, across the board. At this moment, I think there is a sense for the White House that the way to get ahead of this is to get the economy going again, get everything running again, get things up and going. But it seems like when you look at the polls, what people are concerned about is their health and being safe. And a lot of times when you look at the polls, the majority of people say they support social distancing. They want, you know, they're not itching to get out and go to restaurants and do all of these things again because they want to make sure that they're healthy and they're safe. And the White House seems to be struggling with meeting that dynamic, and that could have real implications, you know, all around for the Senate.
Stephanie, follow up on that.
And the White House thinks one of the reasons they can help those businesses open and get the economy going is potentially if they put together this liability shield. So businesses won't face any liability risk if customers or employees get sick. And we know small businesses and large are concerned about that. If you ran a small gym, you might say, you know what, my margins are low. I could lose everything if I open and I risk getting sued. But on the other hand, if this administration is able to move forward and give that liability protection, then think of all those businesses. If you're an employee, if you're a customer, knowing that that business only has to think about their bottom line, not your safety, you might think again about going.
Final thoughts, Dan, in the closing minute about where this campaign stands?
Well, I mean, it stands where it has stood for some time, which is the Biden is leading in the national vote, but we learned in 2016 again that the national vote doesn't elect a president. The battleground states are pretty clear. There's probably half a dozen true battleground states. It is very competitive in those places. Both sides say they want to expand the map, but I think in the end, those handful of states will be the ones that determine it. There's one other area, picking up on what Jonathan said, where the Trump campaign probably should have some concern, and that is voters who have an unfavorable opinion of both candidates. In 2016, Donald Trump won that constituency over Hillary Clinton. Right now, the indications are that Joe Biden is winning that constituency over Donald Trump. So that's another area of concern for them.